Hi all. So today, before jumping into the article, I want to talk about the assignments a little bit and how the final will be. So as you know, we have two major assignments. So one you have submitted already, the first essay dialogue assignment. I have graded them. If you haven't submitted them, you should. So there is no way that I can that you can receive a grade if you do not submit these two major assignments. And then if you have been doing the reflection papers well, if you have been commenting on the YouTube videos, those are participation grades. So the first assignment was the first essay dialogue. You should have put two anthropologists at least in conversation from the first section of the class. Yeah. I still accept if you submit it now, it's okay, but just make sure that you submit it. And the second assignment is, so we were gonna have 3 assignments, yeah? So due to this, what's going on about Corona, I have reduced the number of assignments. So I want you to choose between the second one or the third one. Basically, you will have to write an essay if you like, or if you want to continue experimenting with this new form of dialogue or story or whatever you find, you can as well do that. So it'll be a double space 4-page essay or dialogue or scenario or short story, whatever you like, and you can put into dialogue 2 anthropologists from the second section or from the third section. So how it works. So you can put 2 anthropologists from the second section, and if you choose someone from the third section, then I want you to put that person into a conversation with someone from the second section or the first section. Yeah, so you can choose 2 people from the second section, or you can choose 1 person from third section and the other one from the second or the first one, and you can choose multiple people. Some people did that in their essays and they worked well. And it says in the syllabus that the due day is May 14, but I think May 18 is better. May 18, so after the classes end, we will have one more article to read for Monday. And then on Thursday, I want to do a kind of a review section for third part of the class. But how that will work, I won't do a regular review section. I want you guys to send us, like, instead of reflection papers for next Thursday, on Wednesday I will send you an email saying like I can have your questions here. So I want you to have questions, like when you were think of this as an exercise to write your second assignment. Yeah, just like when you pick 2 anthropologists or pick 2 pieces and you try to put them into a conversation, what is it that you're not sure about? What is it that you want to know more about? So, and in the video that I will upload, I will answer those questions instead of me providing a review. Okay, I think that will work well, and that will kind of help you to prepare for the second assignment. So also what I want to do is that in this class we were going to spend more time on this emerging or like longly emerged spiritual movements like yoga, self-development, or meditation. Those kind of movements, those are how I see kind of beliefs and practices that are outside of the traditional religious perspective, but also outside or maybe sometimes kind of neighboring with secular practices and discourse, let's say. So I will choose an article on Monday to discuss a little bit about that, but since you will write questions for your assignment, for your second assignment on Thursday, I won't want you to send reflection papers on Monday for the article. Yeah? So everybody will write questions for review part. Yeah? And also you don't need to ask questions about the third section, but you can also ask like questions about the second. Just kind of specify your questions. Yeah, if you like give me names, I don't understand the relation between this person, this anthropologist, and the way that the Y or the other anthropologist discusses this debate. Yeah, so for today we will discuss Stevenson's article, The Psychic Life of Biopolitics, Survival, Cooperation, and Inuit Community. So I see that most of you like the article, and I think, in my perspective, it is very well written. It's not very complicated to understand, and it brings together a lot of concepts, theoretical debates in her arguments. Yeah, so one of them is like biopolitics, as Rebecca was asking for me to kind of elaborate on that. We will. Another concept is bare life. She talks about decolonization and how legacies of colonization continue through this practice of care, what she calls bureaucratic care, yeah? And how this is related to our course, I think Alexandria is asking. I think the way that this is related to our course, so we have been looking at the practices that fall outside of the Western secular perspective. Yeah, if you recall Willerslev, if you recall Nadasti, so they are these practices or these beliefs or traditions fall outside like of what Western discourse accept as regular, accept as kind of possible. And in this one too, actually, it's the practice. So Inuits, they have this practice of naming their children, newborns, with the names of the deceased family members, yeah? So, and they believe that this new family member holds something. Or actually, sometimes Stevenson was saying, it's always a comparison with this deceased person. For example, if I have my aunt deceased, let's say I have a deceased aunt and I have her name, so everyone is associating with me with her in some manner. So they may say, oh, Zeynep has the same eyes with her aunt, or Zeynep has nothing to do with our aunt. But in some way or another, that aunt is brought into the social relationships, into the community. So the deceased persons also make part of the community. Also, the life, like the name, becomes very important, since you bear a name from a deceased person which was loved and who was part of the community. Yeah. So what she's saying is that life becomes a space of mourning, like grieving for the deceased person, and that like the community as well. The community making includes that practice of uh, naming the deceased one and practice of including the deceased one in the community. Yeah, which we like the Western perspective doesn't have. So that's how this article is related to our course, but we get that until like at the end of the article. But also I think how this article is different than the other perspectives that we read about ontological turn. This article doesn't talk about these beliefs, for example, naming practices, merely outside of Western perspective, yeah? She talks about how these practices actually become tools of oppression in Western bureaucracy and Western biomedical regime, yeah? So what she's saying is that the Inuit community, like there was an intervention on Inuit community from the beginning of colonization, and that kind of continued in the period of decolonization. Yeah. So the first one was tuberculosis, and in the name of helping, yeah, in the name of helping and maintaining kind of an um, safe and healthy environment for Inuits, they were Canadian government were going to these communities and kind of bringing the sick ones to the cities, and then sometimes, as she was saying, if the people like Inuit people were dead, they were buried in places like without names, like their graves were without names. There were a couple of people, a couple of you guys who brought this in relation to what's happening with COVID virus, and I want to talk about that at the end of the video. But this, like putting people into graves where there was no name, it's so not respectful to the practices of these people, yeah? Because naming is very important for these people, and the deceased people make part of the community, so they want to know what happened. They want to know what happened to the people who die. And after the colonization period ended, she says these practices of intervention by asserted by the Canadian government continued through the issue of suicide. Yeah, so they wanted to keep, like, in order to keep Canadian people, Inuit people alive, they didn't so much care about how these interventions would uh, be perceived by the Inuits. Yeah. So as two of you mentioned, it's like it was more desirable to have a live and slightly disturbed Eskimo. Yeah. So that was the idea. They didn't care if this practices of intervention were commensurable with their own, like with Eskimos' practices. And importantly, she was saying, Lisa Stevenson was saying, like these interventions and these bureaucratic forms of care or medicine, they didn't take the person as her own right. They didn't take the person as an individual with a history or like a full. They didn't take into account the full picture of the individual. The individual became just a number, yeah? So they were more interested in numbers than the individuals' lives and then the care that they were provided in the individuals. And that is about the notion of biopolitics. So biopolitics is a notion that is put forward by Foucault. So this is a very brief, gross summary of biopolitics and Foucault's theory. But Foucault is saying there was a shift in how the sovereign was exercising the power. Yeah, before in the nation states, the sovereign exercised power by killing. Yeah, so the ancient rule before the nation states, before 16th century, let's put it at a date, ancient rule just exercised the power through killing. So it was about the spectacle of torture. Yeah. But now there is a shift in governmentality, the way that the government works. So the new shift is about keep a certain population alive and let the others die. So it's not necessarily about inflicting violence or killing, but it's about maintaining the population alive and letting die others. And how the government was kind of deciding to keep who to keep alive and who to let die. It was race in Foucault's theory. So if the person was defined as a proper citizen in terms of her race, so the person would fall into the category or fall into the population to be kept alive. If not, it will be to let die. Yeah, but then so and the biopolitics work, the reason why Foucault calls this biopolitics, because to keep that certain population alive, there were kind of a science and techniques around rates and statistics of death and health in general. Yeah, so all these questions about how can we maintain a good life, are the regimes, our health, or how much we need to go to see how many times we need to go to see a doctor per year. So this production of knowledge about the life in general and how we need to conduct our life in a healthy manner. Yeah, so he tells actually the power today in today's society work through production of knowledge and through making the individual feel like she needs to confirm with, she needs to align with these produced knowledge in order to maintain a good life. Yeah, so the individual become complicit in the way power works. So that's why Foucault says knowledge is power and power works through production of knowledge, not through violence. But Agamben says when you look at how power works, we actually see that it doesn't just happen with production of knowledge or production of how a good life seems like, but also you see that certain populations, not just around race, but due to historical contingencies of certain eras, become the target of states' extreme violence, and this violence is legitimized. Yeah, so when he talks about Agamben talks about bare life, he's talking about the camps in Nazis era. Yeah, so he says Nazis kind of reduced the lives of the Jews to bare life. Their life could be taken away but not sacrificed in a way. And he's giving this definition like Agamben is relating to this definition to the understanding of life in ancient Greece. So there was Zoe and Bios. When you were talking about life in ancient Greeks, there was Zoe and Bios. Zoe was the good life. Zoe was the valuable life. Yeah, the meaning. There was a meaning in this life, the meaning that you cultivate. But Bios was the mere fact of being physically alive. Yeah, so Agamben says the Nazis treated the Jews as merely having the bios. So in ancient Greece, if you were considered to have merely the bios but not the zoe, then your life could be taken away, but your life wasn't valued as a sacrifice. Yeah, so Agamemnon is bringing that difference from ancient Greece to like contemporary world, and saying that actually, if actually the state defines certain populations as having possessed bare life, and they um, inflict an excessive amount of violence and legitimize this violence. Yeah, so they say kind of legitimize this violence by saying that those populations are a threat to the, in the case, for example, in the case of Nazis, Aryan race. So it can work through race, but it can work through other political factors, because some people, for example, Judith Butler, were thinking this notion of bare life, for example, through looking at terrorists. Yeah, but Stevenson in this case is taking the notion of bare life and saying that the bare life is the life that's stripped from the community. Yeah, in this case, when we look at how Canadian government treats the Inuits, we see that they treat them just as numbers, just as statistic, and stripped from their community and from the way, like they don't respect how these individuals are tied to these communities according to their way of naming, according to the way of mourning, or according to the way that the deceased people make part of the community. And I think many of you kind of drew a parallel between how biomedicine work, how the relationship between doctors, like a Western doctor, and the patient work kind of similarly, like to this notion of bureaucratic care. Yeah, so Stevenson actually, by her notion of bureaucratic care, she's saying, or she's kind of inviting us to think about what care looks like for in different contexts. Yeah, and she's saying the care is an excuse in this, in the way that Canadian government tries to control the suicide rate in Eskimos or in Inuit communities. Yeah, so actually the lives of Eskimos become a tool of biopolitics that is exercised by Canadian government. Yeah, so Canadian government is only interested in people's lives as statistic, as numbers. So they want to reduce the suicide rate. That is because Canadian government, as a biopolitical government, they want to they are interested in keeping these people alive, yeah, but they're not interested in respecting or giving the agency to these governments. So she was also talking about corporates and care, yeah. So the Canadian government kind of blames Inuit people not to be cooperating, so they become like they become, the Inuit people become the so-called savage, so-called backward people who don't understand that they actually, the Canadian government wants to help themselves. And I think there is a relationship between how care or how healing works in our society in a way, because of the way I think this kind of gets related to the way cure is defined in biomedicine, like biomedical regime. Yeah, cure is defined as the total removal of the sickness, of the problem. Yeah, but the biomedical discourse doesn't include a more holistic perspective of keeping the person healthy in the first place. Yeah, so some anthropologists are kind of looking at Ayurvedic practices or religious healing practices. They are juxtaposing these healing forms with biomedical Western perspective and saying that actually cure doesn't have to look this way. And if the cure it doesn't look just the removal of the sickness, then we can understand that the relation between the patient and the sick person, it's the one that is encoded by this perspective of the cure, this secular perspective of sickness, instead of it's a nature relationship or it's a relationship uh, like an objective relationship that happens. Like, it's very culturally loaded, and it doesn't have to look that way, and it doesn't look that way in different forms of care or in different forms of understanding how disease works, like how disease and curing disease work. um, I just want to talk a little bit about your reflection papers. Rebecca was saying, like, while the government's, like Canadian government's heart may be in the right place, but I think it's just this kind of touches to the core of the article. Like, they legitimize the infliction of violence through making, like, through being seen as if their heart is the right place. Yeah, they care, like they want the good of these people. But Stenvenson article shows these, like, notions of care or cure or help, they are very, they're they're not natural categories that you can just use, but also they themselves are loaded with um, cultural biases in a way, and she wants to expand and criticize those. Uh, yeah, and the way that this connects in a way to our world today, I think Alexandria was saying this, like how people are stripped from the communities by with through isolation, yeah, through what's happening now. So, like, quarantines kind of influencing us or isolating us from our communities, and how government doesn't take action about this. Uh, I agree with this. I agree in this way. So it's the situation now, the isolations and the quarantines shows us, I think, two things. Even if we kind of think that we are bound individuals who are capable of doing anything we want and anything we need, it shows that how we need each other. Yeah, how community is there even if we are not seeing it. So we are kind of fragile and vulnerable without the community. Yeah, so it shows that. But also, we are taught to believe the contrary. We are taught to believe that we can take care of each other. Like, we do not see whole infrastructure that goes into our lives, like goes into maintaining oneself. But now the situation shows that in a way, I think. Um, There was one thing that I was going to say, but I forgot. I'm looking for that in my notes. Yeah, I think just to conclude that we can see that we also live in a biopolitical regime. I mean, that's Foucault's argument. And it's about keeping people alive. That's what the medical discourse also is interested in. Keeping people alive, but not the way people are alive. Yeah? When you see, for example, this patient doctor relationship is interesting to focus on because doctor is not the doctor cannot be interested in the overall wellness of the patient. Yet the doctor is interested only in the removal of the problem. And it needs to be quick, it needs to be mechanic, it needs to be objective. And one of you was saying this is also kind of implying that this is not the doctor's fault because they are in the system. I agree with that. Like, this is because of the way we have been thinking about cure and we have been thinking about the disease itself. But I think Stevenson kind of wants us to think if we can see that these notions that we take for granted are based on Western perspective, and we do not have to, like, we can try or attempt, at least even if it's very difficult, to imagine possibilities or potential to create or imagine new forms of care, new forms of cure, and new forms of healing in a way. So that was it for today. Another thing I wanna say, I will put everything in the Blackboard, like the articles that were assigned and the videos, the YouTube videos in the folders that I create, so that you can have everything in there when you want to, instead of like searching it in an email. That might help you to write the second assignment. And for the second assignment, I will want you to submit it and turn it in. I will write this in an email to you. Thanks.